Welcome back to the Shield Wall. Thanks for joining us again. I am Brad, and this is Imperium Magazine Issue 2, part of the Build Paint Play series. In this episode, we will be painting the Necron warriors as instructed in Issue 2 that we assembled earlier in this issue. Now, at this point in the series, the only paints for the Necrons that you've been provided with is Rune Lord Brass. That's a Citadel color Games Workshop paint, and it is part of their paint line. It is a base paint. Now, base paints are intended to form the base layer. And then you have layer paints and other types of paints that serve different roles. But the base paint they're typically the thickest, they typically have the best coverage. So what Imperium Magazine recommends that you do is apply the base paint over on the bare model, over bare plastic. I wouldn't normally recommend this. I'd recommend using a airbrush applied or rattle can, regular can spray paint applied base coat to be your primer coat. Primer will stick to the miniature better and form a better base layer for your acrylics to go over. You can prime something black, white, basically any color you can think of nowadays. You can get a primer in that color. Once you have the can or airbrush applied primer down, then you can start with your base paints, start working up from there. There's a whole lot of pros and cons to what color you should prime your miniatures in. I won't get into that now, because at this point we're just focusing on what Imperium Magazine instructs you to do. So I'm assuming that you have no experience in miniature painting, and the only supplies you have access to are the paints that are provided in Imperium Magazine. So as you can see, this particular miniature, this Royal Warden that we assembled as part of issue 1, I had assembled for another project, and so he is actually primed with a silver primer. And I'm applying the Rune Lord Brass over the silver primer, which is fine. It's coating okay. Metallics don't like to coat over other metallics very well because metallics tend to have a glossier finish. So you will have to apply a few coats, but you're going to have to apply a few coats anyway, because the bare plastic has a glossy finish also. That's one of the benefits of using a spray primer, is to provide a better surface on which your brush applied acrylics will adhere. But what you can see the kind of brush I'm using. I'm using essentially a ruined brush, because I'm going to be pushing paint into crevices, jamming the brush down in there to make sure that everything gets paint on it, which is very abusive work to a paintbrush. So if you got an old cheap brush laying around, I definitely wouldn't use nice brushes for this. You don't have to worry about detail. The instructions in the magazine allow for certain areas of the miniature not to be base coated. It doesn't matter. Just apply it. It's better to get, at this stage, in the painting process, it's better to get paint on plastic now than to forget a spot. You're going to see the Rune Lord brass not coating 100%. Every step in Imperium recommends that you thin your paint. If the consistency of the paint you have you like, you can thin it, you can not thin it. I'm taking it straight out of the pot because the paint in the pot is a good consistency to me, in my opinion. But you have to make sure that you spread the paint out. If you allow the paint to clump, it will obscure detail. It will dry that way, it will obscure detail. And always remember that for many portions of this model, this is not the only coat of paint that is going on this model. Alright, let me rephrase that. This is serving as the base layer for some areas and the prime layer for other areas. So there may be other areas on this miniature that may get some silver, and then may get a color on top of that, and then may get a wash on top of that, and then may get a highlight on top of that. So you may end up with 3-4 layers of paint on certain areas of the miniature. That's fine, as long as your paints are a good consistency, not too thick, and you spread the paint out. What I like to do is start in the deepest areas of the miniature. So on this Necron warrior, I would probably start under his hands, under his chest plate. And once I make sure I've gotten the deepest areas, the hardest to reach areas, then I work my way out from those areas. You can see now I'm working on the most raised areas, his shoulders. Those are the last places that I painted. Now, all 4 of these miniatures are basically the same. They're dudes on foot carrying 2-handed rifles. And the color we're applying is the same color on all 3 of them. So you can do this as a batch. Sometimes that saves time. You don't have to change paints. You know, you just set out all 4 of them and knock them out. Go through all 4 of them. You can see I'm rotating the miniature to get to where I need to get. What do I mean by that? Well, I'm not, in order to paint the underside of the miniature, I'm not turning my hand and head to see under the miniature. I'm flipping the miniature upside down. You can move the miniature to get better angles. That might seem self-explanatory, but you know, don't be afraid to move the miniature around to be able to see it. You can see I've gotten some paint on the base. Not a problem. Not a problem at all. Don't worry about that overpaint on the base. You're going to come back and that base is going to be covered with other paint by the time you're done. So as you can see, I've gone back and I'm applying another coat to the Royal Warden. The video's real time. You just take a look at it. You might want to give it more time to dry. You don't want to try to apply more paint to partly dried acrylic, because as the acrylic dries it starts to solidify, and then if you try to move it around again it can tear and that could cause problems. So just wait for it to dry before you start putting more paint on it. But Water-based acrylics, like these Citadel paints, do dry relatively quickly, especially if you apply them in a thin coat. The first coat will look like garbage. It'll be streaky, you'll be able to see the plastic through the paint. It will not look good. Do not glop it on there though. The first coat is not going to look good. You got to resist the urge to just slather the paint on there, right? Spread it out, keep it thin. You know, for some reason a tree analogy just popped in my head, right? You got to hit a tree multiple times with the axe before the tree comes down. Insert your analogy here, right? It'll be fine. Don't glop it on. Keep it thin. Keep it spread out. And you could come back and keep applying layers until you get a smooth, even consistency. Right? The color should be uniform. You shouldn't see any of the plastic through it. If you were using a primer coat, you shouldn't see any of the primer through it. The more layers you get on there, the less you're going to have to worry about the recesses and the cracks. And the more you can focus on the raised areas to make sure that they look good. Because large smooth surfaces, like his shoulder pads, like the plating on the legs, since there's flat and smooth, there's less for the paint to grip to, so the paint's going to want to slide more. Those are the areas that are going to need more coats. Now, as we get into some of the painting steps for IMPERIUM magazine, if you have access to different colors and you want to paint your models a different color, I've worked ahead in some of the steps, and all of these techniques and practices aren't color dependent at this stage. So if you don't like the look of Runelord Brass, you don't like the look of the Necrons in IMPERIUM, or you want to paint them up from a different dynasty, right? Necrons are divided up into dynasties with their pharaonic influence, and you want to go for a silver color, same techniques apply. So that's good. That's it. You've got your first layer of paint on your Necron warriors. Congratulations. You've done it. You've gotten paint on plastic. If you're following along with this IMPERIUM magazine build, paint, play review, and you're a beginner to the hobby, you've done it. You have assembled miniatures and you have put paint on those miniatures. You've taken the first step into a much larger world, as Obi-Wan would say. Stick with us. Stick with Shield Wall for more IMPERIUM magazine build, paint, play review. There will be more in the series. We'll be assembling and painting the Assault Intercessors very soon. That video will go up, and we'll keep working our way through the series, working our way through the line for all of you following along at home. Please give the channel a subscribe. Please give the video a like. Leave a comment if you have any questions about the video series or any of the extremely basic techniques used in this video. One thing that's kind of neat about IMPERIUM is that it does build your techniques as you go for beginner painters. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.